The desert sun hammered down on forward operating base Sentinel like a forge, turning the sand to glass and the air to fire. Captain Marcus Chen sat in the command tent, sweat dripping from his brow as he studied reconnaissance photos scattered across the makeshift table. Outside, the rumble of generators mixed with the distant laughter of soldiers trying to forget, even for a moment, that they were sitting on the edge of enemy territory. The intel was clear. Insurgent forces were massing 15 kilometers north, preparing for something big. Marcus felt the weight of command pressing on his shoulders like stones, each decision a gamble with lives he couldn't afford to lose. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell pushed through the tent flap, her medical bag slung over one shoulder, auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun that somehow still looked disheveled from the heat. Marcus barely glanced up. "What is it, Mitchell?" he asked, his voice clipped with impatience. She set a water bottle on his desk with deliberate precision. "Sir, you've been in here for 6 hours. Dehydration impairs judgment." He waved a dismissive hand. "I'm fine. Don't you have patients to check on?" The words came out harsher than he intended, but stress had filed his patience down to nothing. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice professional. "With respect, Captain, keeping the commanding officer functional is part of my job." Marcus finally looked up, his eyes hard. "You're just a nurse, Mitchell. I need tactical advisors right now, not medical advice." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Not hurt, but a kind of cold calculation. She nodded once, turned on her heel and left without another word. At 11:23 p.m. the world exploded. Mortars screamed out of the darkness like falling stars, slamming into the perimeter with bone-shaking force. The attack came from 3 sides simultaneously, coordinated and vicious, exactly the kind of assault that turned training into chaos and plans into confetti. Marcus sprinted to the command post, shouting orders into the radio, but the responses came back fractured and desperate. The northern watchtower was gone, just gone, swallowed by fire and smoke. The armory had taken a direct hit. Worse, the communications array was damaged, cutting them off from headquarters and any hope of reinforcements. They were alone, surrounded, and the enemy knew exactly where to hit them. In the medical tent, Sarah worked with the focused intensity of a surgeon and the speed of a combat veteran. Wounded soldiers poured in, carried by their comrades, bleeding and burned and terrified. Her hands moved without hesitation, triaging, stabilizing, saving lives while the world shook apart around her. But her mind was somewhere else entirely, processing information with mechanical precision. She'd spent 3 years as an Army intelligence analyst before switching to combat medicine. She'd read terrain, analyzed enemy patterns, predicted movements. And right now, watching the pattern of incoming fire through the tent's open flap, she saw something Captain Chen had missed. At 1:47 a.m., Sarah burst into the command post, her uniform stained with blood that wasn't hers. Marcus turned, his face haggard with exhaustion and fear. "Mitchell, I don't have time." She cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. "They're hurting us, sir. Look at the attack pattern." She grabbed a map, her finger tracing the impact points. "They're hitting hard on 3 sides but leaving the eastern approach relatively quiet. They want us to retreat that way." Marcus stared at the map, his tactical mind suddenly clicking into gear. "Into the canyon pass," he breathed. "It's an ambush." Sarah nodded. "There's probably a company waiting in those rocks. We retreat, we die. But if we understand their plan, we can use it." The next 15 minutes transformed everything. Sarah laid out a strategy with the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times in her head. They would fake the retreat, send a small convoy east with lights and noise, making the enemy think the entire base was evacuating. Meanwhile, the main force would circle north under cover of darkness, using the terrain Sarah had memorized from studying geological surveys during her downtime. "There's a wadi, a dry riverbed that runs behind their main position," she explained, her finger tracing the invisible route. "It's narrow, Barely wide enough for single file, but it'll get us behind them. Marcus looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her. Why didn't you say something earlier? She met his gaze steadily. You didn't ask, sir. You just assumed. At 3:32 a.m., the counterattack began. Marcus led the main force through the wadi, moving like ghosts through the moonless dark, while Sarah coordinated from the command post, tracking positions and timing with deadly accuracy. The diversionary convoy roared eastward, drawing the enemy's attention like moths to flame. The insurgents took the bait, repositioning to spring their trap, never suspecting the hunters had become the hunted. When Marcus's force emerged behind enemy lines, the battle turned in heartbeats. Caught between the base's remaining defenders and the surprise assault from their rear, the insurgent force collapsed, scattering into the desert like shadows fleeing dawn. By the time the sun rose at 6:15 a.m., it was over. Marcus found Sarah in the medical tent, still working, still saving lives. He stood in the doorway, dust-covered and humbled. "Mitchell," he said quietly. She looked up, exhaustion written in every line of her face. "I was wrong. You're not just anything. You saved this base. You saved all of us." Sarah allowed herself the smallest smile. "Respect goes both ways, Captain. Remember that?" He nodded, extending his hand. She shook it, soldier to soldier, equal to equal. Outside, the desert wind began to blow, carrying away the smoke and the fear, leaving behind only the truth that courage wears many uniforms and wisdom often speaks in voices we're too proud to hear.